So same thing for questions tonight. You put them in the Q&A and not the chat. So myself and the panelists can go through them. What I would say is, because we have three excellent panelists tonight, and we're covering a wide range of topics. Yes, same theme, fertilizer reduction, but we're going to be talking about some rotation strategies, carbon to nitrogen, nitrogen stabilizers, humic acid, biological stimulation. We're going to cover a lot of stuff. So, for example, Chris Seymour is up first. If you have a question for Chris, you might as well put it in the chat while he's talking. It will not disturb him. And then I got my right-hand man to the left of me, Trav's here, and we'll kind of filter through the questions together and come up with some kind of common themes, because likely we won't do all of them. So same thing, best question, which is voted by me, gets a Covers and Code jacket. And then I think we're giving out a couple hats. We'll see how many hats I give out tonight, but I think that's a pretty good strategy because yeah, there's kind of three unique and diverse farms that have the same goal, which is reducing inputs, but taking three different steps to get there. So I am very much looking forward to the chat tonight. So in front of you, hopefully the delay isn't too bad and you are looking at a cost of production from the Manitoba government. I highly recommend any farm. They post these budgets online. They keep them up to date. They are an excellent resource to understand the true cost of production. So these prices, we looked into them. We got some prices from some fertilizer input companies today and correlated them with the Manitoba cost of production budget, and they were spot on. So these are up-to-date numbers. Some alarming stats here. Fertilizer for canola, $209 an acre, for a grand total cost of $625. I know there are people out there that are saying, yeah, but Joe, canola is $25 and that only equals 25 bushels. But that does make farming pretty risky now, doesn't it? And for my cattle farming brethren, many who are on tonight, we take a look at corn, $256 an acre for fertilizer for corn. That's $800 an acre in total costs in corn production. And I will add, this crop production budget has the land cost of $78, which in my area, that is about half price. So a really excellent tool. You can go on, there's an option there for you to punch in your own costs. I highly recommend everyone out there take a look at this, especially if you haven't booked fertilizer. Start playing around with some of these numbers because they are, they're big numbers. It seems risky to me, but that's what we're talking about here tonight. So to introduce the panelists, this is, like I said, we're getting three unique perspectives here, and each one of these farms very well thought out in what they're doing. They have goals, and what you're going to hear tonight is some of the practices that they're using to implement these goals and eventually get to where they want to be, which is reduce risk, reduce farm inputs. So we have Chris Seymour. So Chris farms with his brother Brett. They kind of started adapting soil health principles a couple years ago. So Chris used to work for Nutrient and is very well thought guy. And him and Brett are just starting to implement some of these practices on their farm. So I thought the perfect person, because most people on this webinar tonight are actually looking like, how do I take this first step? So Chris will be great. Him and his brother I guess they've had a cow herd for a couple of years now. They're starting to do some animal integration and some cover crops. Our second speaker tonight is Cowan. He farms with his brother Nick and family, and they've been doing zero till for 40 years. They've had long rotations, animal integration, large scale farm. But the very interesting thing is that they chose this year to go synthetic free, or try their best to reduce or use as minimal synthetic fertilizers as they can. So obviously very relatable. And the last one, Boersch, They have a conventional and organic farm with no animals, but Alex does a lot with foliar feeding, humic acid, intercropping. Of course, that you'll find a common theme here tonight being better, more thoughtful rotation. So yeah, we're going to get into, everyone is trying to reduce their fertilizer input, and we get a nice spectrum of different ways to achieve these goals. So Chris, if you want to unmute yourself and show everyone your pretty face, I'll introduce you. I guess just a quick question, Chris, how's my internet? Is my delay okay?
It's been pretty good so far.
Nice. All right. Well, get into it. If I'm a little late changing slides, just say, hey, Joe, switch it up, or we might be in delay. But why don't you tell us about your farm and kind of some of the practices you're putting in place to be more mindful of your fertilizer use or try and reduce it?
Okay. Well, it's my brother, Dad, and I farm together. We're fortunate enough, Dad's letting us have quite a bit of say the last few years. Not everyone gets that luxury. But we decided my grandpa had cattle till 04 and the buildings were all still there in good shape. So now we're learning we probably would have been better off without the buildings and just went straight ahead to calving on pasture, but we are still calving in a pen because it doesn't overlap with seeding. The grain and growing cash crops is still our main focus. We very much like the cattle and definitely going to continue to grow that side of the farm. But as of right now, when the economics come down to it, the cash crops is what pays the bills. So we've had cows now for 3 years. We're up to 105 pair for cattle, and we're putting in about 4,000 acres of cultivated, well, no longer cultivated, but cropland. This would be our very first year on trying to make a lot of these changes. The end goal is what Joe just said, Cowans are trying to do this year. No synthetic fertilizer, but we're in our first year, so some very big differences there. Practices that we have started is we tried a little bit of humic acid last year, and with it being so dry, we went from 120 pounds on our canola to 90 after talking with Alex quite a bit last winter. And because it was so dry, that was still our best yielding canola field because it had the most moisture out of all of our canola fields. It didn't need the extra fertility. So sticking with that, we've kind of felt comfortable enough we're going to take probably about 30 to 40 pounds off, just right off the top, off most of our crops. And we're going to replace that with in-season melted urea if the conditions present themselves, it's worthwhile. If not,
Chris, maybe now would be a good time to touch on just what your fertilizer program kind of looks like.
Okay. Well, typically we were running, FOS was pretty general across the farm, 50 pounds, FOS an acre. That's of actual FOS, not so. And we're throwing 20 pounds of on canola and sometimes a little bit on wheat. It kind of depended on drill capability. If we had the way of doing it. On the nitrogen side of things, so typically we were doing 40 or 50% ESN and 120 on canola, 110 on wheat. Oats, we're generally 80 to 100 depending on the field. Corn, this was actually our first year growing corn, so we did 120 on it.
And then Chris, just maybe touch on, so that's kind of your usual rates.
That would be usual rates.
What you're planning for this year, and I know you touched on it a bit, but what you're planning for this year, and how it's maybe, the practices you put in place to reduce that number.
Okay, well, for this year, what we did is, I'll start from the beginning. We started this fall because of the fact our canola fields, for example, we fertilized for 50 bushels of canola and we got 30, right? So there's lots of, especially with the dry year and the ESN. So I took our fertility that was left in the fields and I figured out what I need. And on the top end on any of our fields for our best areas, we should need no more than 90 pounds. But we had areas where our canola did yield 60, so there's no nitrogen there. On the areas where we got 2 bushels of canola that this year probably, even with rain, not going to yield well because of just the area of the field. So we're going to use variable rate. We end up with a different air car and different drill, so we can fluctuate a little better than our old one. We're going to use variable rate, and we're going to go as low as 10 pounds in those areas that don't produce. And then we're going to kind of put our rate of 90 pounds. And the reason I cut that down was because of the humic acid with the urea. We got rid of the ESN altogether to try and cut back our fertility. And we're still fertilizing at that 90 pounds for roughly a 48 bushel canola crop without adding the melted urea.
Okay, you segued perfect. A lot of people that are on tonight want to know about melted urea, and I know you are not an expert, nor am I, but we both do it. Fortunately, we have an expert on today, and Alex is going to talk more about it. But just talk about the actual kind of logistical process of the melted urea and any trials that you saw results from.
Well, because it was so dry last year, we actually melted urea. We just didn't see it would pay benefits. We didn't even try it because by the time I would have mixed up one batch, it does, I think I talked to Alex, it does like almost 200 acres by the time you get a 1,200 gallons in there or something. So yeah, at the rate I was going to go, so it wasn't even going to, it was too much that it wasn't going to pay. It wasn't worth it. So we actually axed our melted urea last year. And like I said, our best canola field was 44 bushels, and that was on the field we cut back fertility. That was also our first zero-till canola field we have done before. So that kind of gave us a bit of zero-till. This year we went the whole farm zero-till, which actually I think is in the next slide.
Perfect.
So I don't have much to talk about melted urea. I'll leave that for Alex.
So will I.
So, oh yeah. So for the one other thing we tried this year, we took our absolute driest field and decided that would be the best field to try intercropping on, and got no rain. It turned out to be our lowest yield per acre, tonnage per acre of crop we took off. But because of the intercrop, it actually penciled out as good as any other field. It was about on par economic wise with our other crops, our regular straight oats crop. And we did oats, peas. We actually did forage peas for seed production. And
maybe Chris, just give guys what you use for pounds, what you use for fertility, herbicide option, just quick. I know lots of people are curious about it, especially this year.
Yeah, I was going to touch on that. So we did 34 pounds of oats and 100 pounds of forage peas. I think after what I saw this year, we're a bit more. It was still pretty thick. Being a dry year, I think if we got rain, forage peas would have came through, but being a dry year on a dry field, the peas were very sparse in the canopy. We ended up with 40 bushels of, I think it was 41 bushels of oats, and we cleaned out 10 bushel an acre of peas, and then we had about 2 bushel an acre worth of screenings. But we put 0 chemical on that field and 0 fertilizer. We drove across it once with the seeder, put the seed in, and we used Eco-T and Awaken on the oats, and Eco-T and granular inoculant for the peas. That was our only touch of that field, and came back and combined it. So
and maybe, I know you guys got a new system now, but just what did you use as far as separating this year and what you're hoping to do this year? And I know, because you and I chat all the time, that you're looking at doing more of this year.
Yeah, so we actually took it to the seed cleaner and got him to separate it at 75 cents a bushel. That gets pretty costly, plus the time of trucking it there. This year, we've actually got a Garrett Industries table. Chris Ropers, who's been on this a few times, is actually who I talked to quite a bit. He has the same system set up. We're gonna set it up in our same lineup as our dryer, so it'll be completely automated. We can just flip the switches on and let it run to separate the grains, and we can do that right on our own yard then. Don't have to truck it anywhere. And we are actually planning 760 acres of pea oats intercrop this year, just because the way fertilizer went, it seemed to make to us, it made more sense.
Cool. Well, for the sake of time, we'll keep moving here, Chris.
Yep.
I know this is a topic near and dear to my heart, so I'm sure you'll have some questions in here.
So one other thing we've started doing, and this started, I guess, the same year we got cows. Joe's sales pitch to me was, you just got to trust me and plant 30 acres. So I trusted him, and I quit my job that same summer, and here we are. So
look how you turned out.
Yeah. So we started with the full season, grew that the 1 year, and then just could see how it worked. We actually, while the brochure has that's our swather in there, and that's how good it grew right next to the yard, where we had some moisture. It was a very variable field, so like that, but we could see the potential there. So we've picked, and this is what a lot of people get too focused on, is they come up with a long list of, well, if I'm going to grow a cover crop, I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do this. And, we picked two very simple things. One being, we want something living on that ground as much as possible. And the other being, we want it to focus on infiltration. It's been dry for 3 years. Those were two simple things that we knew, let's just start there. So actually the deep tiller's for sale. We're going completely zero till and selling the deep tiller, so that mainly Dad's not tempted to hook on and pull it back out of the field. But and then we just started putting some fences around the field, just sticking some fence posts in and single strand of wire around there, electric wire. It doesn't take long to do, or it's not that expensive. Every field we fenced this fall paid for itself easily, just in the fact we started the cows on the field at the middle of September, and we didn't take them off till the middle of November, when the snow got thick enough they were actually having trouble. We got pretty good snow catch, so they started having some kind of trouble.
I think an important thing to talk about when we're talking about fertilizer reduction is intercropping, like a legume with cereals. And I mean, the obvious next opportunity is, with the cost of feed, grazing these animals, extending your grazing season, just how profitable, and I don't mean dollars in your bank account, but how much money you can save from a feed standpoint if you have the animals. And hey, to you grain farmers out there, you got neighbors that have cattle, and the price of feed is insane right now. You don't need to get many grazing days an acre to make, if it costs you $3 a day to feed a cow right now, and you just charge somebody $2 a day to graze a cow in November and December, well, you get 50 grazing days. That's $100 an acre. I mean, find me a fungicide or a nitrogen stabilizer that's going to return you $100 an acre.
We just to touch on that, we have two neighbors that we kind of help with. Well, with having cows for 3 years, we've relied on help from people with experience quite a bit. Asked what to do, because Dad had cows growing up, but he hasn't for a lot of years had anything to do with them. So we have two neighbors who we're working with to try, and our issue is figuring out how we're going to get water to the fields without actually hauling it. That's a lot of work. And in the come fall, when things are freezing, that's not much fun. So we're working with conservation districts. Ours is Pembina Valley here is very active in that. If anyone's interested, they want to hold up water. They want, as long as your cows aren't going in the dugout, they're looking to slow down water. You can get wells. But we got a couple neighbors who, they don't have really much cropland, but we have a lot more cropland than we have cows. And if we can find ways to get water to more fields, they're like, yeah, we'll graze the fields. Like, that's not hard work. Put the fence up, and it depends on, like, when we have our cover crop regrowth, we do cross fence that. when it's just a field of oats regrowth, we just let the cows go. It's no work at all. They just go get them the quarter section or whatever. We gave them a full section this year. Let them do it themselves. Our nitrates we tested were a little on the high side, but as long as you make sure they got a full belly when they go out there. Talked with a lot of people this fall about that, and they said as long as you aren't forcing them to eat it right to the ground, that was a big part of our decision to just give them the whole section. They will pick what they want, and just don't force them to eat the bottom half of the plant. That's where your nitrates are. Those were a lot of things guys have brought up to us about concerns when they saw our cows out there this year. So we're the new ones in the area doing a lot of this stuff, but the old farmers who've done it the same way for 40 years are taking notes more than you think and asking questions.
I was the crazy guy for a long time, so I don't feel sorry for you.
Yeah. So I guess I should say we did try some clover in the wheat this year, but
Sorry.
Oh, no, that's all good. You can switch. We tried some clover relaying in the wheat this year. We timed it with that big rain we got in the beginning of June. It was perfect. Every single clover plant germinated. No rain for the next 2 months though. Every single clover plant died. And then when the rains came in the fall, because we got perfect germination off the start, there was no seeds left. We had nothing. So it's going to take some figuring. And I mean, if you get a year with 2 months of no rain and 33 degrees every day, it's not, some of those things aren't going to work. Don't get discouraged.
Don't forget.
We're working on figuring it out. All, if anyone has questions, they can ask me what we've found that might work. And I'd like to hear what they're finding too.
Well, and I think you touched on a really good point, Chris, about the relay clover into the wheat, where it's like probably a good idea for fertilizer reduction strategy is to build a system that makes you less resilient on fertilizer. Coming up with a fertilizer reduction strategy 1 month before seeding probably isn't going to yield you good results. But I had the exact same experience as Chris this summer, where 2022 was going to be fertilizer free, synthetic fertilizer free, which means 2021 I needed to plan, which was of course legume intercrops, but anywhere where I had a cereal, I went and relayed in clover. And same thing, we must have caught one of those sparse rains, it germinated, and 2 months later everything was gone. So it's not that it's not going to work every single time. I mean, the path to hell is paved with the best of intentions. But it's like, this is how we learn and grow. And it's working within the system, have a goal and start putting plans in place to achieve them. And for you guys just starting, like, you guys are leaps and bounds ahead of, where I was when I first started.
Well, we're taking all the knowledge you guys figured out for us. So.
Yeah, there was some learning. I would say failures to successes is probably 10 to 1, but sometimes it hits, and damn, does that feel good.
Yeah. And one other thing, if you want to cut back your fertilizer, you can't have a 2-crop rotation. Like we've extended in the last couple of years, we've slowly worked, to getting our canolas pretty well all on a 4-year rotation now. We just started that, but I counted, and we have 12 different cash crops in our rotation. Canola obviously still takes the quarter of the acres. That is our biggest acreage, but it's hard to cut it any further back when $20+ canola right now. But that is the one thing. If you are growing canola every second year, you're never going to see those numbers get better. If you have a 2-crop rotation, you're stuck in that cycle. It's a cycle that you're not going to get out of very easily. That would be my opinion from just what I've seen.
I think you'll find friends on this webinar.
Yeah.
and it kind of comes back to, Chris, I know you had it in one of your slides and we didn't get to touch on it, and we're not going to make people understand now, but what a longer rotation gives you is that balance of carbon to nitrogen. So if we can keep the energy flow balanced into the soil and the feed source for the biology, we get stable soil aggregates. If we have stable soil aggregates, we can infiltrate water. There's pore space, there's air, there's surface area for biology to access these minerals. And then we become less dependent on the synthetics that, that we otherwise would in a wheat canola rotation. You know, we just keep that balance. Life is about balance, and the soil biology is the exact same. It's like, if we can just keep this balance by spreading out, you know, the diversity in our rotation and spreading out these rotations, it's like, that's just, I mean, I honestly think, let's throw cover crops out the window, intercrops. You know, if you just took a 10-year rotation, and Dell's going to talk about this, a 10-year rotation, and had the concept of seed N in your mind, I mean, you can probably reduce your fertilizer rates. I don't want to say a number, but, you know, significantly, you know, maybe 40 or 50%.
Some webinars say if you got like, as long as you got all four of the major, you know, kind of crop or plant types, you know, you got your warm seasons and then your cool seasons of both broadleafs and grasses in that rotation, and you're, you know, anything over 8 years, they kind of say 50% right away. By the time you get once through that rotation, you're already at 50% of fertilizer, and then you just keep that balance going through that rotation. Doesn't have to be all in the same field the same year, though cover crops can accelerate that number big time, things like that.
And of course, I didn't mean to just discourage cover crops like that. These are all important steps. Yeah. But I was saying, even if that didn't interest you at all, just being mindful of seed N, I think, it just changes your soil structure which makes it functional. And if you got a functioning soil, that soil is way less dependent. The plants that are growing in that soil are way less dependent on synthetic inputs and fungicides and insecticides, you know, and herbicides. So anyway, Chris, you got anything to add here? Sorry.
Yeah, we'll keep going. I'll touch on them very quick. So on the right side, that's just to show, that's actually full season cover mixed with probably about 60% of the dry matter was just oat straw. And that with the cows going through, we're dumping in a pile just on the field for them to eat. That's what's left. And we did that right up until the middle of February here. We start calving actually this weekend here. Any day we should have a calf showing up.
Who are you?
Having calf show up. We started calving and we got sick of the snowstorms 2 weeks ago. So that's why the cows ended up in the pen, as you can see on the other side. So yeah, I know we all talk about how awesome it'd be to have them calving on the field, but that's something that's got to fit for you. And this seems to be what fits for us best right now. Labor is the biggest thing. We need all three of us.
You've got a brother that seems to love to do it. So that's
great. He doesn't mind feeding
cows
cows in the winter. So he lives in that yard. I live in the other yard, I guess.
Yeah. I'd probably calve in the winter too.
I got a dry grain in the fall. So I guess he calls it fair. I'll take that deal.
I would too.
And then the next slides here, if you want to go to them, there's 3 pictures.
Well, I'm enjoying them. I can tell you that.
Okay. Well, now all 3 are there. You can kind of barely see on the left side a bit of the one. This is the warm season blend. We just put 5 acres around the yard because we tried some alfalfa that didn't grow this spring, and we figured let's see what happens. This, I think I looked it up. It was July 8th or between the 8th and 11th. So when we sowed this into 6 inches of pure dust. We did disc it because there were so many weeds there. We were going to plug our hoe drill trying to seed it. That's how bad it was. It grew like crazy, except for one little patch where the alfalfa had grown, or it had taken up a little more moisture than the rest of the field. Nothing grew until the rain started. So it's kind of neat to see. But yeah, cows grazed it right down to, I just threw my hat. That's after they were in there for an afternoon on like an acre. It wasn't a very big area. We kicked them out to the field, and then every time they came back in, by the time they were done, it's bare dirt now. They ate every single plant there was whenever they'd come in for water, because that's where the water was.
And just quick, we talked about this. I know this has nothing to do with fertilizer reduction strategies, but you guys are starting to direct market beef. Just give a 30-second plug. There might be some customers out there, but just like your experience and how it's going.
We've just barely started. We actually haven't even set up a website yet. We're just getting there. We just threw out a thing on Facebook and shared it with all of our friends. And our issue actually right now is we need to find freezer space and then have a supply of beef, is why we've been hesitant to actually try and, because there is a lot of interest out there. So we're actually looking at it expanding past just the beef, even just because there's a lot of interest. And so we figured we can do it. And if we're going to improve our soil health and it's a chain effect. It improves your plant health, then your animals are going to be healthier. So
I mean,
price and sorry.
I mean, if the end goal is a self-sustaining system, a system that's not dependent on synthetics, I mean, what we're looking at here, the animals are an important part of that to reduce that. And I mean,
they are. And you know what? If you're calling a cow for $800, it doesn't make much sense. But if you can turn it into ground beef and get even $1,200 out of it, you're winning. It's worth the amount of effort you put into selling ground beef. You don't have to put a lot of effort into it. You do get what you put out of it. So if you put more effort in, you get more. But I actually asked our local grocery store, just out of curiosity, what his costs were from from Cargill. His cost is roughly the same as what we've been advertising and selling our grass-fed beef for. And that's just him bringing in who knows where it came from. His cost is the same. So that's like the grocery stores just can't even make money at it, is essentially what he said. He's like, he can't even convince people to buy beef because the price has gone so crazy. But
to all of you out there that have beef and are sick of this corrupted cattle market, there is interest out there. The packers have corrupted the industry so much to where it is profitable for farms like you guys. We're looking at doing the same thing on our farm. I know I'm not a fan of, the added work and stuff, but I know Dell's coming on next. They got their direct marketing as well. It seems like there's consumer interest. And like we said, we're building a system that's more resilient. We're, reducing these inputs. The animals are, or can definitely play an important role. And it's like, let's just get paid for our superior production systems. So Chris, thank you very much. Any last word? Obviously you're sticking around for questions, but any last word?
No, I don't think so. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions.
All right, cool. Well, thank you very much, Dell. Yeah, you got questions already. Dell, you want to unmute yourself? Cool. Well, just to introduce Dell, I guess we never went to university together, but Dell's older brother, Nick, who most of the people on here will remember from the webinar last year, he was talking about stripper headers, and I still laugh about it. Dell's also going to talk about stripper headers, but more of their system and how they got to where they are, which is they're looking at not using synthetic fertilizer this year. We were at a tour at the Cowan's place November 2nd, and I mean, I dig in lots of soils all across Western Canada, and there's few soils I've ever stuck a shovel in that looked like theirs. So excited to see the results. And Dell, take it away. Talk about your farm, your family, and hopefully the delay doesn't get too bad, and we'll have a chat here.
So I think it was in 1984, Dad took on, I think it was a hay buster disc drill from the conservation, and he put it on side-by-side trials versus anhydrous and a hoe drill, and zero till versus conventional till. And it was just outstanding how much more grain he was growing with the disc drill. So that's in the 80s, we made the full switch to zero till. And then we were pretty diverse rotations, but we struggled to get through our residue. We had hoe drills and seed masters, and we were dragging a lot of weeds around, and then we were spraying more and uploading the fertility up front, and things weren't working that well. So we decided to go away from putting on the fertility up front, and noticed we had a lot less weeds because of that, and really focused on minimal disturbance and clearing our residue. And then we integrated cattle, which then we integrated corn, and the ability to clear our residue is even more crucial. So I think we finally found our drill that can do it. And these photos that you see, that middle of June, maybe they don't look outstanding, but that's something that we don't get upset about, is looking the best in June. We're more end of July, August, come harvest, that's when we want to look the best. So
why don't you give us an example I should have prepared you for this. Sorry, but I just thought of it. Why don't you give us an example of kind of your strategy as far as rotation, and like I guess maybe start with kind of the main crops you grow and a strategy as far as rotation. How much thought you put into as far as like producing grain, cattle feed, or grazing after harvest?
Yeah, well, we talk rotation weekly, hours, lots. So that's something we're all constantly talking about rotation. And why we decide to do things is a lot because of, like you said earlier, with the seed-end ratio, and also we're running older combines, so 6 crops. If we can spread them out throughout 2 months, Joe, that's something that lets us get around the farm and get it all in the bin.
I'm actually offended you just called your combines old. That hurts.
Well, they each have about 2,000 separating hours, so they're getting up there a bit.
These webinar viewers are regular listeners, so they know what combine I drive, and that I'm allowed to be offended. No, keep going. Yes,
I think you can go next slide, but
we got the growing season. You might be on a bit of a delay here.
Okay. So the growing season, one photo is the oats and one photo is the wheat. And the right-hand side there, the wheat, that was a full season graze the year before, Joe.
Yep.
So it's a very degraded quarter. Like, it's got fences upon fence ridges. It's blown around multiple times, and we were struggling with that quarter, and we put it into a full season graze. And this is wheat with no fertility. There was no wheat. Like, it was just like Chris said, like, it was we just seeded it and combined it. It was so easy, and a great crop of wheat. So that's why they wanted to have that slide in there. The oats, next year we'll be putting a vetch and clovers with our oats. And that's why I wanted to have this slide in there is, pretty nice crop oats, pretty competitive, but you can still see some sunlight's getting through to the soil there. And that's why we're going to try a companion crop, get the vetch and get the clovers, fixing nitrogen and out-competing weeds.
So Del, like, this year, is the plan still, you guys are going to try your best to go no synthetics?
Yeah. Our corn will go on, well, you toured the fields last year. It was fall rye, and then we planted a cover crop, and we got a lot of biomass out of that cover crop. Got a lot of grazing.
We got,
and then there was some
here.
hog manure applied in the fall on those acres. So we'll be, and then the corn, we'll put some vetch and some long season soybeans with the corn to also. I was going to touch on it later on about a slide that had the corn showing how much sunlight gets through, but
we got it coming up, and I do want to talk about maximizing sunlight capture. But why don't you take a chance here to talk about some of the intercrops that you're doing this growing season?
Yeah, so the oats will be with some companions. The corn will be with some companions. We'll do the forage peas and canola. And then the rye, we'll leave the rye as we'll have a slide coming up. Rye, it is so competitive, so growthy. I don't think clover stands a chance to establish in there. But we are producing, a lot of biomass after the cash crop rye. So we'll do that again. And then the flax, we'll grow flax on its own and soybeans on its own. So we'll have two monoculture crops with flax and soybeans. Everything else is with companions. And then one field will be a full season graze with, for numerous reasons. It's a field we're struggling with. There's some salinity. There's some, yields are down on it. With fuel going to $2 a liter, we're cattle costs are high. So this will allow us to get the cows out, hopefully for the months of January and February into this field, and reduce our amount of silage we need to use. So that's kind of a snapshot of our rotation.
Del, I can't see the questions, but I can just see the notifications. I'm positive when you were talking there, the questions came in. What are you going to spray on this stuff? What's the herbicide plan?
Oh yeah. Okay. So oats, we have super clean fields coming in with oats. So if we're starting clean, if we don't disturb anything with our dish drill, pretty confident we're not going to have, I think we're going to outcompete our weeds with oats. If we have to spray and kill the vetch and the clovers, we're not seeding high rate of vetch and clovers. So, I mean, that would be the worst case scenario, is that we do have to kill them, but hopefully we can just let it go.
Yeah.
The corn, Roundup Ready soybeans, we know vetch is, resistant to Roundup, and alfalfa seems to not die with Roundup either. So we can use Roundup in our corn, and then the Piola will be pursuit and a grass killer, and rye, we can do anything there.
I had he might be on tonight. James Frey's on tonight. James, hopefully I'm getting this data right, but he's done the first person I learned about corn or oat vetch from was James Frey. And I forget where I met him. He showed me this crop and him combining it, and the return and the feed test from the straw. And I was like hooked. I couldn't wait home to go home and try it. But he told me something very, very interesting that day, that oat vetch consistently was out yielding monocrop oats.
Yeah.
And I said, so is that because like the vetch is providing nitrogen to those oats and that's a limiting factor? And he said, honestly, I think the biggest factor is we're not hurting the yield by spraying a herbicide on oats, which are very susceptible to a herbicide. And that's something not a lot of people understand. Whereas like, if you can get away without a herbicide pass, I mean, oats especially, but a lot of these cereals, you're going to see a positive yield response.
Well, a lot of times you're out there in the sprayer and you're wondering like, what am I doing out here? Like, it's really, there's not many weeds.
Usually I'm like, what am I doing out here? I could pay somebody $11 an acre to do this. I got to get to the baseball.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. Well, let's talk about sunlight capture. Sorry. I think
this is there's a little delay. Yeah. This is the corn slide.
Yep,
so this is corn over at my uncle's place. I think it's the crop insurance slide at the start. I think this is rated J for Joe, but it's pretty poor sandy land. And last year was so dry, and she's a vet, and she's got, there's hundreds of people with horses there, and they're like, it's a pretty nice crop of corn, they kept saying. And I mean, where would we be without it was rye the year previous, and we stripper headed it, and then we sowed with a case corn planter with trash whippers. And I mean, that's a 10 feet tall corn, but look how much sun's still getting through there. And I just wanted to say how important it is to have armor on the soil.
How about an intercrop to capture that sunlight?
Well, that's what I was thinking. If the first goal would be to have green plants there, Joe, and then, but if you can't achieve that, you want to have it covered with armor. So you're right that, hopefully this upcoming year that we have some soybeans and some vetch that is a blanket of green out there. That's what we're going for. Yeah.
I tell a lot of people this story, but I literally learned my, most of the corn vetch shit I do, I've either run off you or your brother. But I remember the first year I grew it, I had this mat of vetch on the soil. And there was a spot in the field where I turned around with the sprayer. So there was like the boom stayed in the same spot. So that one spot got about 5 liters of glyphosate and it wiped out the vetch. So it was black. And I went out on a hot day in July, took my temperature probe, put it on the soil, and it was 103 Fahrenheit. Which means virtually everything is shut down in the first centimeter or so of the soil, your most active portion of the soil. And I went to a spot underneath the hairy vetch where it's just, you pick it up and it's a mat, 70 Fahrenheit, room temperature. They regulated, like the biology regulates the heat and,
It's amazing.
and makes it perfect. So now my most active portion of the soil, the top centimeter, is totally functional, cool, moist. And like, it's like people ask me all the time with corn intercrops, they're like, oh, all that hairy vetch, you know, where do you get the moisture from? Well, like, think how much moisture is lost from evaporation and black soil.
Yeah.
Never mind the inactive biology, you know?
I totally agree. I've walked in some buddies' corn and just some, I don't mind walking through other people's fields. And if it's hot and it's black out there, like you start sweating walking out there, where this is nice and cool out there.
That's the thing. It's like the soil captures the heat and it re-radiates it off. Well, how the hell would you like to be a corn plant standing in that?
Oh, 100%.
All right. Well, I want to get to this because this is a really cool idea. And I'm so glad you included this slide because I think this has some real potential.
Yeah. This is on the left. This is wheat, just 2 varieties of wheat, 1 bushel each. Think Tisdale and Brandon. And then the right is just Brandon. And you can kind of see a line there. Like, I should have been out there a little bit earlier probably, but it was for sure slightly taller, just overall more growthy of a plant. And
so Del, you and I talk about things like this all the time, but for some people this is an incredibly new concept. Why would you grow 2 different varieties of wheat in the same field versus a monocrop?
Well, you know, I think there's the variety guides at every year, and there's usually a different winner. So it's kind of insurance, like which wheat is going to win the yield competition. You don't really know, but if you mix 3 of them together, probably one of them will. And also they have different characteristics that, you know, some have better protein, some have better height, some yield better, etc. And then it creates a little more resilient of a system too, because they say, you know, they fend off diseases better. And I think the more sunlight you can capture, you know, if you get 2 different heights, then their leaves are going for sun underneath each other, and you have less sun hitting the ground, you should have less weeds. So I mean,
what I always say is, like, look how inefficient from a sunlight capture perspective a even field is. You know what I mean? When does that ever happen in nature? There's different plants at different heights to maximize sunlight use, because some plants, you know, capture it here, some plants capture it here. But if everything's flat as a board, where's your surface area come from, you know?
Oh, 100%. And with canola, we did this last year with canola too. And they have, you know, they all have different seed treatments. Not that, well, probably some people are getting away from seed treatments, but, you know, the flea beetles are causing havoc. And to have that, you know, the diversity of that is a benefit too. So there's a lot of reasons. And I mean, it doesn't take hardly any time to accomplish something like that.
I mean, I've said for a long time, if you're doing corn silage, why on earth would you ever grow 1 variety? You know what I mean? Like, you're going to grow a high lignin corn silage so they don't blow over, right? Well, why don't you go 50% high lignin and 50% a longer season, so you're capturing more energy, it stays more vegetative, and then we don't have to deal with all the damn lignin that I digest.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Anyway, I love, and I mean, when you and I were talking on the phone earlier, you made a really good point of, like, we got to start getting away from herbicides. I mean, you didn't say this, but we haven't seen a new group of herbicides since the same age as me, 1987 or 88. And I'm like I'm old and tired. So I imagine these herbicide varieties are feeling the same, or these groups where it's like, there's no magic bullet coming to save us. And
No.
honestly, I don't know if we'd be interested in it if it did. It's like, we got to start farming smarter and keeping the soil covered and plants growing to start reducing these weed pressures.
Well, 100%. Yeah, that's a lot of the strategies we're working at is because of that. And I think, your full season graze too, I think that's a way to really like almost like a great reset is the full season graze. If you get behind, I think that's an option too. But
well, and shameless plug, we've got a regenerative field that we went full season cover crop in 2018, I believe.
yeah.
And what I wanted to do is I wanted to graze it full season cover crop and then just put the right principles in place. So correct carbon and nitrogen rotation in place. And I'm never going to touch it with fertilizer again. And this year, it was the worst drought we've ever seen. But in 2020, July 1st, we had 3.5 inches of rain in one night, July 1st. And we infiltrated I got a video of me walking around the field the next day. Again, the importance of stable soil aggregates and water infiltration. We infiltrated 3.5 inches of rain on that night. And from July 1st, 2020 to July 1st, 2021, we had less than like 2 inches of precipitation. And those forage peas I grew on there doubled the yield of our conventional forage pea ground. And that came from the year before in one night. So it's like, it's nice to put a tangible result to stable soil aggregates. I preach about the importance of stable soil aggregates in a functioning soil. And the average farm's like, well, how many bushels per acre does that equal? And I'm like, well, I don't know. But it's a really good practice to put in place. If you're going to get 3.5 inches of rain on July 1st and nothing for the next calendar year. So it's more about just creating a system that builds a functioning soil so you're not dependent on these synthetics. Sorry, 100%. I know I'm sounding like a broken record.
You do these good practices and you do the full season cover. I don't know how many years you have to do it. 1 out of 10, 1 out of 5, 1 out of 7, but I think it needs to be in there somewhere. I don't know how many years, and that's what we're going to find out here down the road probably.
I think so much of it depends on, like Chris and I were talking about, you can grow monocrop everything, but as long as you're willing to go, 8 years or 6 years, spread out your rotation, that's half the battle. Well, the thing about a full season cover crop is, it's not a cure-all, but it's a biological stimulant. So if you're going to put the right practices in place year after year after that, well, there's no reason why the biology wouldn't stay stimulated and those soil aggregates stay stable. So I think as much of it depends on you and your management style. So Del, had a lot of questions about the stripper head. Why don't you take just a couple minutes and talk about it, the practicality of it, and obviously you got a residue picture here. Just talk about dealing with residue and all that.
Well, the picture, both pictures are fall rye, and that's why I'm thinking you can't get a clover or vetch growing in there, because look how competitive that is. That's pretty much full sunlight capture, and that's at harvest. So the stripper headers they make harvest easy with big acres. The fuel is just, I don't have any numbers for you. I just know when we have one big slip tank, and when we have the stripper headers on, one slip tank does both combines. You just split it between the two combines. They run all day. And then when you have the draper headers on, each combine needs a slip tank. So it's half. I mean, the co-op fuel guy, he was questioning us if we switched to Petro-Canada, or he's like, did you lose my number? Like, he is like looking at how many acres we had combined, and was very inquisitive why we didn't call him for fuel. So
How
you know,
about capacity, Del? Like, what are you doing with the draper header in a day versus stripper header?
well, they're for sure harder acres. Probably our limiting factor right now is our grain cart and our trucking. Like the guys, if they put those combines to the mat with the stripper headers, they're just sitting there waiting. So we said, well, slow down and just go at the speed that the grain cart can keep up, because what's the point of sitting there idling? So they're running most of the time in 70% engine load, and you know, we're getting like 400 acres a day, pretty relatively easy, and we're super happy with them. They're we wanted them for a really long time, our stripper headers, and you know, it's a lot of money, and it also changes your seeding plans too. So it's a big undertaking to make that switch, but we're not.
Maybe talk about that, Del.
Yeah.
About, I mean, of course, you guys got a disc drill now, but I know I've seen videos Nick sent. He's going through seed and fall seeded cover crops with a hoe drill. But maybe talk about like when you're getting on the field. Is it any later with the stripper head? Are you trying to relay crop into that, or just talk about your experience with the following spring after the stripper head?
Yeah, so we've this is our second harvest with the stripper header, and last year was fairly dry, right? So we haven't had a wet year, and people are warning us of that, but we'll see how that goes. I'm not sure. This year will be the test. There's so much snow out there still, so.
But hang on, but those same skeptics that say, oh, you'll get a wet year and this will screw you. Hey, you had 2 dry years, and I was to your place last winter. Nobody had snow in their fields except for you guys.
Yeah. Well, like I mean, last spring we seeded into the residue, and like it's so mellow. It's almost soft when you walk out there to check for seed. And there's just beautiful moisture there. So the seed bed behind a stripper header, I think, is the best seed bed personally. And yeah.
Well, I can't disagree, but anyway, we're gonna get into fall seeded covers here.
Okay.
And kind of talk about your strategy. So obviously you got the stripper head and you're getting out there as quickly as possible, but hey, after fall rye, what's your kind of strategy as far as what you're putting in the ground?
Well, remember at the tour there, we're going to have fab beans in there next year. Remember that's the nice thing about those tours is, you know, you get some people that challenge you, and I don't know the guy's name, but he sure thought we should have fab beans in there. So we'll do that next year.
I'll think of it.
Yeah. But
I'm looking at Trav anyway. Yeah.
Like I said, rye is just too competitive for a companion. So, but you're getting it off the end of July, start of August. So we're still able to achieve really a lot of biomass in our fall rye. And we have the K-Hart double disc opener, which is attached to our John Deere drill. And the John Deere drill works fine in straight wheat or rye or oats, but we found it really struggled in corn and sunflowers. But the disc drill works great in the stripper head stubble. The hoe drill, which you asked, it's a C2 Morris with a 3/4 of an inch opener, single shoot. So it's pretty narrow. Things have to be perfect for it to work. Like it can do it, but it's not consistent, and it does drag a bit here and there, and you got to turn out and dump, and it kind of makes a mess.
Well, and the thing I find about, like, I would been zero till or whatever, we do the odd tiny bit of tilling here, like here and there, usually just rough hay fields or sprayer tracks. But Iowa, if you drove past my fields on the highway, you'd say that's 100% residue cover, but it's not. Those shanks drag that residue around.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're looking at it from the sun's perspective, straight up and down, I figured my disturbance was 80%, even with 3/4 inch openers. The thing about the disc drill is nothing moves. You know, it stays. Whoop. Sorry, Del.
No problem. I think that's going to be really crucial too, Joe. You know, we talked about weed resistance, and
yes,
it's all going to factor in. So
I mean, weeds don't grow. Weeds only grow where there's black soil or disturbance. You know.
That's right. So we I guess we sowed forage peas, oats. I think I had a picture. There was some volunteer canola, which great. But and then the rye volunteered. I mean, it was a pretty nice seed and mix out there. But I think in the future, maybe some sunflowers as well as the faba bean. Just they're so frost tolerant. Would be two good additions into our fall seeded cover crops.
What about flax, Del? It seems to be the buzz in the regenerative soil health world. The stimulation of the mycorrhizal network.
Yeah, we were growing flax as a cash crop. I don't have a picture, but it's the only way to combine flax is a stripper header. Like it's pretty nice and enjoyable out there, and we haven't put it in the fall, but I mean, usually now that we're growing it for a cash crop, there's always a Rubbermaid of it somewhere, so we could toss it in. But
sorry, just we'll for the sake of time, I've also got a rather philosophical question for you to finish with, but I just want to talk about your field day and some of the economics of actually grazing these fall seeded cover crops.
Yeah.
So here's a picture from the field day and your cows grazing. This was close to the water trough, so there wasn't a lot growing here.
Yeah, there was. I mean, that picture doesn't do it justice.
No,
but I think I think we had a number around about $2,000 of silage a day for that herd, is what we would have had to feed them.
Yes, and that's what Mike told me, and that's I think my number was 800, and for the amount of cows that you guys had, I think it's about $2,000 a day.
Yeah, and we also bought some 400 weights, and we had them in the dry lot feeding them silage. And then we brought mind you, they had been weaned earlier, the ones we purchased at 400 weight, but we weaned ours and brought them into the pen beside. And wow, like there was a bit of not as uniform, the calves, but was there ever some monster calves in there coming off that cover crop? And
so at what date did you guys start grazing, like grainland residue?
Middle of October.
And then when did you start feeding winter rations? Like when did the snow get too deep?
Well, we actually ran out of cover crop. It was not necessarily the snow getting too deep. Well, like it was. We ran out of water too. That was a bit of a challenge. We went to move the herd off this one field that we had just got there, but they had no water and they did not want to move. Like we come out there with the quads and they're like, piss off. Like we're happy out here. But so I guess it was over 2 months they were grazing these cover crops, and it took us to just after Christmas, which in the future, if we have that full season graze, then hopefully we can get longer into January, February.
I mean, and this is what I try to explain to my cattle farming brethren, where it's like $2,000 a day times by 60 days is your profit for the entire year. If we're talking about a commercial cattle herd that is selling to the commodity market, that's where we need to make our money. The most expensive part in producing beef is feed. And the nice part about, we're talking about fertilizer reduction, if we can start reducing our fertilizer by producing biomass to balance our C/N and turn that biomass into beef, this is how we make our systems tick. This is how we make them profitable and have the ability to reduce biomass. So I know there's people on tonight that says, hey, I don't have cows. Well, you've driven past cows. I will guarantee you there is a farmer that if you told them, graze my animal or I'll graze your animals for $1 a day, I'll send my cows there.
Yeah. That doesn't even factor in, the crop out there next year.
Exactly. And I mean, we're cycling these minerals and again, like it's fertilizer reduction, that's really hard to do if planning a month in advance. I know Alex is going to talk about some really good options and I don't want to spoil them, but if we're talking about the greater system, what an excellent way where it's like we're producing plants to reduce our inputs the following year, but we can turn that plant biomass into meat that we can sell. Like these are good options.
100%. Well, it's a lot of it and fear marketing too.
Yeah, for sure. Like, and I'm sorry, I don't know even know if you can see this picture yet, but it was the 2nd of November and we were pulling vetch plants out of your cover crop that were nodulating like that. So you want to talk about fertilizer reduction? There ain't a plant we can grow in Western Canada that can produce nitrogen fertilizer or produce nitrogen like hairy vetch. And the benefit is it's not putting it in a synthetic form. It's tying it up in plant biomass that is then safe. It's not going to leach away. It's not going to volatilize off. It's going to be consumed by biology and put to your plant next year. So it's like that is Mother Nature's ESN, and it's a hell of a lot better than the actual ESN, That's
right.
And it's the 2nd of November. Most fields are either dead or tilled by this point, and you're producing fertilizer for the next year.
Usually you can't get a shovel in the ground.
No, exactly. And I was out there digging in your field and they were absolutely gorgeous and full of life. And that's something I want the people on tonight to take away is like, you guys have been doing this for 30 years. It's like you earned the right to have the conversation about going synthetic fertilizer free. This doesn't just happen lickety split overnight. It's more about the system and putting goals in place and then putting the practices to match where you want to be.
100%. Like it's, and we can always use some of Alex's techniques too, if we're deficient, if we're short, but I think
perfect segue because we are ungodly over time. But Del, stick around. We got a whole bunch of questions for you too. But thank you very much, and we will come back to you. Alex, if you want to unmute yourself and get your video on. So I'm very fortunate to know Alex. We've known each other for years. If you watch this webinar, I do melted urea, mostly based on Alex's recommendations. I use humic acid, basically based on Alex's recommendations. They've got a conventional farm and an organic farm and are implementing these practices without livestock. That's a lot of the pushback we get is, okay, that's great. Soil health's great, but how do I do it if I don't have livestock? Well, there are no excuses because Alex is doing it successfully. And he's going to talk about his farm. And we had a ton of requests about humic acid and fulvic acid. So we've asked Alex to kind of break into the chemistry behind it all and what's going on. So Alex, take it away. I'll butt in with questions, but thanks for being on, and just tell me when you want me to switch slides.
All right, thanks, Joe. Yeah, you can skip my little ugly mug there.
It's a gorgeous
on to the next one. All right. So most of you guys probably know me already from talking on here, but we farm about 5,000 acres just west of Winnipeg in Eli, Manitoba, in the heaviest gumbo clay soil you could ever imagine. And our biggest issue is kind of like everyone else around here is water infiltration and soil aggregation. So we're trying to do a lot of the same things as Dell and Chris, and do a lot of things with plant diversity mixing different varieties together of wheat, or trying to go more zero till, relay crop, and things like that. But I'll kind of try and focus on some of the other, I guess, simpler things to implement if you haven't planned as much in advance to get the seed to do those kinds of things, or have the seeder to do those kinds of things. These are really easy things that we can kind of just blend in with our fertilizers, or just incorporate into our spraying plans to kind of, I guess, earn the right and create a way to reduce some of our fertilizer initially. And our long-term goals on our farm are definitely, we want to reduce our dependence on chemicals, hopefully cut them out completely, reduce our fertilizer use. We've reduced by 30% up to now. Our goal is at least 50% in the next couple of years, and hopefully get to zero like Dell's doing. And hopefully with improving our soil, we'll be able to really just feed our plants with better nutrient cycling. So I'll get you to go over to the next slide, please.
You got her.
Yeah. So overall, we always talk about in regenerative farming is minimize soil disturbance. And I think most people just think about tillage, but in the end, probably arguably an even bigger soil disturbance is throwing on like 130 pounds N, or hitting your soil with 2-3 herbicides in a growing season. Like those things we have to realize are huge soil disturbances. And I think they're also affecting our long-term fertilizer efficiency. So what our plan is keep going with plant diversity and go to things like stripper header, maybe even integrate animals on our farm as well. But the big thing is buffer all our high salt fertilizers with a carbon source. So always paying attention to that carbon to nitrogen ratio. And for that, we want to use humic acids. We want to add fulvic acid to our foliars and to our herbicides. We want to really increase the efficiency there and the uptake. So we're reducing a lot of our herbicides by over 25% and seeing at least, if not better, results with the, and that's going to be huge this year when you're talking about double the price glyphosate or Liberty and all these other things. And so doing this, we also want to balance our nutrition. So by doing that, increase the bricks so we don't use any more fungicides. We want to cut out, we haven't used a fungicide in 3 years really, but except for to do some trials. But we basically want to cut those out completely because we want to have a better bacterial to fungal ratio to really improve that soil structure. And then the other thing we're doing on our farm, but I realize it's not accessible to everyone, but there is more and more opportunities to get compost. I know in Portage, they're probably going to be producing over 100,000 tons a year of compost. So if people are close to there, there's huge opportunities to if you don't have animals, at least introduce some sort of other biology into your soil, as well as some organic matter and nutrients that aren't high salt fertilizer.
And Alex, I'll touch on a point that you made, and I know you're probably going to come back to it because we asked you to kind of go into the details about humic fulvic, but absolutely amazing when we balance the pH of our water and add fulvic acid to our pre-burn glyphosate, the results we got at a reduced rate. And where glyphosate, I just booked mine, $16.75 an acre for 540 grams. Well, at least I know 540 grams with a 2.9 pH and fulvic acid is actually going to kill my stubborn weeds. Whereas we were up to as much as, 1,000 grams of glyphosate per acre with nothing else, and just seeing minimal control on things like absinthe or nodding thistle, any thistle, wild buckwheat. So it really is on a year like this year where not only is it expensive, but supply is so tight. It is the biggest no-brainer I make on my farm. Like what is the fulvic acid cost for to add with glyphosate for a pre-emergence burn down?
Yeah, pretty much 60 cents an acre. So
Yeah, and I'm just telling you, if you've never seen it before, the results are just absolutely amazing. It made glyphosate work like I had never remembered glyphosate ever working. So I know that's probably another part you're going to talk about later, but I just had to talk about my own farm experience where it's like that is the easiest money that I spend on the farm is adding fulvic acid with our pre-emerge glyphosate, and there's a whole bunch of science behind the digestible carbon starting to break down the glyphosate residue in the soil, which is something I'm also very interested in. So sorry, I'll keep rolling with you unless you had something to add there.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks. Well, I just wanted to touch on one thing with diversity, and like the easiest diversity to incorporate is when you're seeding. And so intercrop it doesn't extend your growing season like some of the relay underseeded stuff would, but it's at least adding a bit of diversity, different carbon sources going into the soil from root exudates and stuff. And when you plug in today's fertilizer numbers, if you haven't bought your fertilizer yet, and we've got a Ukraine-Russian war going on, it's not going to get any better. The numbers just make sense. There was like a brief period in time when fertilizer was cheap and canola prices were really high, and there it really kind of made it hard to make sense of some of the intercrops. But now that our input costs are so high again, and there's a very good chance that the yields could be higher than what I put here, and the prices are definitely higher for peas, for example, than what I put into here. But the difference in potential margin is almost double right now.
That budget that I showed at the start, I find it so interesting on a canola crop when canola is up like virtually double the price for what it was a year ago this time. Guess what happened to the break-even yield? It didn't change. Farming just got riskier. That's all. That's the only thing that happened. So yeah, sure. If we can grow 60 bushel canola, that's great. You're going to make a shit ton of money. But if we grow 20 bushel canola like we did this year, that won't be good.
No, 100%. And we've seen it in so many places on our farm with intercrops, so it's just more resilient. Especially this year, like we had crazy differences where all of a sudden you'd be going through an intercrop and you would see just through moisture fluctuations how the ratios of crop just changed throughout the field and how it just adapted. And we had to reseed some peas and did pea barley beside it, and we seeded the pea barley, and I don't know, I think it was like almost June 10th or June 12th, and in tons per acre, it was pretty much double what the peas did that were seeded in April, early May. Like the adaptability is just crazy. And then we're talking about fertilizer efficiency, or at least cutting fertilizer costs. That's a huge component. But and here's kind of a picture of, I know you don't always love ball seeded cover crops, but we've actually had some pretty good
annual cover crops. I want to be specific.
This is actually like, this picture here is a mix of bin run oats, barley, lentils, flax, soybeans, added a little bit of sorghum sudan grass, and I can't remember what else was in there. And that was that was seeded August 15th, and that was beginning of October, just after a frost.
Okay, Alex, I'm going to challenge you, and I know the answer to this, but I mean, so often you and I live in the same bubble, and we forget, what we know maybe isn't the most common knowledge. So I'm looking at that field right there, and we're talking about fertilizer reduction, and that doesn't make sense to a cynic like me, because there's green plants there that used up nitrogen, used up phosphorus, used up potassium. Why would that reduce fertilizer inputs?
I think it has a lot to do with just cycling carbon, breaking down that residue that's there. Soil temperatures are probably higher at that point in time. our peas were fixing nitrogen until probably middle of November, because I think there's just more microbial activity going on. And so there's not enough lignin in that cover crop for it to tie up a ton of nitrogen. And we were scared about it taking up too much moisture last fall. And so we actually terminated some cover crops early. But wherever we let it grow longer, and we also had some, for example, relay alfalfa going into canola. And like everyone else was basically spraying everything dead in the fall just to conserve moisture last fall going into this year. And our best crops, especially oats after cover crops, so like oats after relay alfalfa and clover and clearfield canola, did about 10 bushels better than our oats just going after basically nothing seeded in the fall. So it's hard to explain, but I mean, through water infiltration tests and stuff, I guess that's how we make sense of it.
I want to talk about Gary Zimmer just for a quick second. So, I mean, when we talk about carbon to nitrogen, you can get into some very, very complex chemistry and biology, but he says, just simplify it. That biology that's responsible for breaking down that crop right there needs the same things you and I need. Needs air, water, shelter, food source. Well, if I was picking a food source and I'm trying to get to the ideal 24 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen, C to N, is that not the most digestible crop? Like if I was hungry or starving, that would be the crop that I would choose to eat. And that's what he said. He said, just simplify it. Does that look digestible? Does that look like I would consume it and I would get nutrition out of it? Well, yes. And so the answer is that crop doesn't use anything, nothing, because that biology is that is a balanced ration. It is going to be able to cycle those minerals so quickly, and we see it all the time. But the benefit that had is capturing the 3 minerals that make up a plant: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. We cycle water and carbon, and that's how we start to reduce our synthetic inputs, is by capturing the 3 things that add life to the soil: energy and water. So it's like, don't get lost that that's going to soil test and not come back great. The minerals are there. All the minerals will be broken down. It's like my old man always says, he's like, we're growing things that's using minerals. Well, it's not catching a Greyhound bus to the neighbor's field. It's going to die and be consumed right there. And it's going to contribute to the stable soil aggregates and the functioning of our soil and make us less dependent on the inputs, which is why we're here talking about it. They've gone insane. So it's like
100%.
That is your fertilizer right there. That we're looking at your fertilizer for next year. That will make an immense difference on next year's crop. That digestible, diverse cover crop that you've grown there. And I don't mind annual cover crops. It's just they don't work a whole lot. Sorry. Anyway,
but I think the thing is that. Yeah, go for it. Yeah. So the last thing I was just going to say as quickly is, like, I think the other thing that we probably underestimate is that if we don't feed the biology that we want to mineralize nutrients by having something there for them to digest, then they won't be there when we need them in the spring.
Or they're going to start consuming the carbon, digestible carbon in your soil aggregates, and your soil's going to collapse. I mean, 100%. Stable soil aggregate is only there without an energy source, a plant feeding it, for what, between 2 and 3 months. So it's the thing that kind of drives me the most crazy about the zero-till movement, is they missed a very crucial step, which is, yes, when a cultivator comes through, it destroys soil aggregates. But if we don't have a living energy source, a plant there to feed that biology, you're going to lose your soil aggregates anyway, because the biology, in order to live, is going to consume the carbon out of your soil aggregates. And you're going to have, I've seen it. I've done the water infiltration on zero-till land for 20 years without cover crops or, wheat canola. And it's no different than the tilled land.
No.
Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to
So-
hijack your part.
all good. So I guess it's a pretty good segue, because first we're going to talk a little bit of what we do to our seed at seeding, but when we get into the humic acid, it's actually old organic matter from photosynthesis. So that we're just using as a stabilizing mechanism. But yeah, so I'm kind of going to go through just a few steps on our farm that are pretty simple to implement that we use to increase our fertilizer efficiency. So something that we find super low cost, that there's more and more proof that it's actually working pretty well, is adding some sort of a biological. So we use Eco T because it's more broad spectrum, and a seed primer, so some balanced nutrition on the seed. It's pretty cheap. It costs us anywhere from like $1 to $7 an acre, and we're just seeing better frost tolerance, way better root development, faster nodulation, especially on like those lateral roots and stuff like that. And that's just giving you access to more nutrients quicker and more mineralization in your soil. So that's kind of a quick, easy one to start with. And then I guess the second step at seeding, so if we go to the next slide, is chelating our nutrients. So we're like coming back to what my goals were at the beginning. We just want to minimize that soil disturbance and keep that carbon and nitrogen ratio. So what we're doing is we're adding a carbon source to all of our fertilizers. So whether it be nitrogen or phosphate or any of the micronutrients, because we know there's a ton of studies out there that our nutrient efficiency sucks. I think phos is not even 30%, and probably in our Red River Valley soils, it's even less because it gets tied up by the high magnesium. And like something I never realized before is how low some of the nitrogen efficiency is too. Like the USDA has lots of studies of like below 50% nitrogen efficiency, which is horrible when you think about the crazy amounts of CO2 it takes to produce it, and then the crazy amount of CO2 we lose from the soil when we over apply it. So I guess if you can go to the next slide, it'll explain it a little bit better. So humic acid is just derived from ancient organic matter. So it's basically immature brown coal deposits. This is just like the molecule. So it's a super complex molecule that's basically just a bunch of carbon, nitrogen, and hydrogen. So it's full of amino acids, carboxylic acids, sulfhydryl groups, and phenolic acids. And all these things help in surface absorption and chelation of fertilizers. So basically metals and non-metals. And something that I didn't realize until now is I saw some stats that I think about 1 kilo of humic acid actually has more stable carbon than 1 metric ton of manure, like hog manure. So there's a lot of possibilities with this fertilizer. If you go to the next slide.
Yep.
I'm a little bit of a delay. Actually, okay. So I will bounce back and forth to a couple different ideas because I'm going to explain better how the humic acid actually reacts with the fertilizer. But this is just kind of an interesting side note. So there's soil tests out there now that can measure our humic acid in our soils. And what's been happening is, because we've always been applying a lot of synthetic nitrogen, is it's been bonding with carbon basically to stabilize the soil. To stabilize itself is using some of the old organic matter to stabilize that carbon. And the bacteria are feeding on the nitrogen when we're putting a ton of nitrogen down, and they need a 5-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. So they're using up that old stable organic matter to basically stabilize that nitrogen in the soil.
And then what happens with that carbon?
So that carbon is then, when they die, is basically goes up in the air as CO2.
Yes.
So, which is, I guess, good if you have plants on top to capture that CO2 again for plant growth. But overall, it's a terrible thing. So
It is the issue. I mean, for people that don't understand the issues with fall applied nitrogen, that's it. Is that we produce this massive amount of CO2 coming out of the soil because we applied all this nitrogen, and we need the biology to stabilize that nitrogen, and we have CO2 being respirated from the soil and no plants to catch it. So there's
100%.
no chance to cycle it. It's just lost carbon from your organic matter.
And not only that, like we're just getting to learn a little bit more about these soil tests. So these soil tests are a little bit different than your regular ones. They're using mild acids that mimic basically root exudates. But what it's showing here at the bottom, you can see the humic acid levels, but they've been starting to figure out that when your humic acid levels in your soil are low, your access to some of the big four nutrients like calcium are quite low. And basically they're finding this in almost every conventionally farmed field now, that there's very little humic acid left. And I think it has a lot to do with not growing a lot of plant diversity, only having, like, let's say 60 days of photosynthesis, and then just hammering the soil with way too much nitrogen at once and never buffering it. So if we can fix that in the long run with a bunch of, so it's like one of those factors that we never really thought about, but apparently this humic to fulvic acid ratio is extremely important in actually accessing the nutrients for the plant and stabilizing them in the soil. So if we go to the next slide.
You got her.
And this is where the humic acid is super important, is the chelation. So it's going to neutralize the positive charges. So it has a cation exchange capacity of like 400 or 500. Our really high CEC soils, like the Red River clays, are usually around a 40. Sandy loams probably like 20 to 30. And just to put it into perspective, so that's how it can hold on to those nutrients. So it'll actually bond with like your urea or your nitrate or your phosphate and take up those negative or positive charges so that it can't be taken up by other things in the soil, whether it be your calcium, your magnesium, or it'll buffer it from getting taken up by those bacteria. And it actually, in some of my later slides, you'll see it'll actually completely change some of the bacterial and fungal populations. So instead of working like something like your urease inhibitor or your nitrification inhibitor, where you're actually inhibiting biology from doing its own job, you're basically just balancing it in the soil so that they don't need to get a huge flush of bacteria in there right away. And there's huge side effects from using those nitrification inhibitors, where when they leach into the waterways, they're actually creating worse algae blooms and things like that, because now the bacteria in the water can't break down that nitrogen anymore and basically force it to evaporate, which is kind of interesting. So and the other thing that humic and this carbon does is it increases the permeability of root and leaf cell membranes. So it's called cell sensitization, where the plant, when it's buffered with this carbon, actually wants to take up the nutrients more. And so that part is kind of, I find super interesting. And I'm not sure why that is, but it also works on a foliar when you're using it with melted urea. And the other thing that's interesting about humic acid is it's actually a host for fungi. And our biggest issue in our soil, at least for us, is we know that we have like a 10-to-1 bacterial to fungal ratio, which is horrible for soil aggregation, breaking down residues. And it stimulates saprophytic fungi, especially, which help with nitrogen breakdown. And saprophytic fungi don't need nitrogen to break down lignin. So if we're talking about tying up nitrogen for the future, for the next crop, well, if we're relying 100% on bacteria to break down that carbon, then we're going to be tying up a lot of that nitrogen that maybe the microbes have created for us, or that we still have left over from the year before.
So just to touch on that, saprophytic fungi live off dead and decaying plant matter, whereas the other fungi we were talking about, we talk about mycorrhizal fungi a lot, actually creates a symbiotic relationship with a host, so gets its energy source from a living plant, whereas saprophytic is responsible for dead and decaying, recycling those minerals from dead and decaying plants back into the system.
Yeah.
So you want next slide, Alex?
Well, I was just gonna explain basically how we do it. So when we stabilize our humic acid, our nitrogen and our phosphate with humic acid, we use either a granular or a powder, which we put into a liquid. So we're usually, as a rule of thumb, using about 5% humic with, of applied nitrogen, or 5 pounds of humic for applied pounds of total product for phosphate. Or when we use liquid 2800, we put in a quarter of a liter of 10% humic, so like 100 grams per liter of water. We put 100 grams of humic per liter of water, and we mix that with a gallon per, so it's a quarter liter of that per gallon of 2800. And when we do that, I like safely in the first year, I would be really comfortable reducing your nitrogen by 15 to 20%. We reduce ours now by about 30%. But if you take into account right now, like if you were to reduce from 100 pounds to 20 pounds, your ROI, and get the same yield, your ROI just from a nitrogen saving is like 15, 16 to 20 bucks an acre, depending on what the price of your nitrogen is. Never mind.
That has to be low at $1.27 a pound urea. That must be low.
Yeah.
Because it's anyway, sorry, continue.
For sure. So, and there's like a ton of side effects. So what we've seen over time too is it's kind of evened out some of our fields too. Some of the salinity areas, because it is so attracted to salt, have really improved. We have some areas along railroad tracks and stuff like that where we went from just kosher growing for the first 100 feet because that water cycle is completely broken there, I think, from the vibration and the compaction along the railroad tracks, to now we're getting 40% or half a crop. It's actually pretty amazing, but it took 3 or 4 years for that to happen. Yeah, so cool. You can go to the next slide.
Next one. Sorry, we took your video away here, but if you just want to.
No worries. Basically, what I wanted to allude to is that just be careful though on your humic acid sources. It should be a leonardite source, and it should be water soluble and have a high pH if this is your goal. There's humates out there that are basically just raw humates, and I think they're great for, let's say, integrating with cattle if you have to put them in a feedlot, or for stabilizing manure, or if you're putting it on a field to change, like a field that has a ton of salinity issues, and fundamentally change that soil structure. But overall, if you're using it for stabilizing fertilizer, you want something that's extremely reactive really fast. And you want it, when you put it in, the easiest way to test it is if you were to put it in water and you just see it, instead of it dropping straight to the bottom and then slowly breaking down, that it already on the way down is completely breaking apart in the water and solubilizing.
And that was the video you had, but my internet won't handle that.
All good. I'm lucky that my internet's working today, because it's apparently,
it seems like it's going okay, so I don't want to jinx it.
According to NetSet, I can't have internet past -20. That's what they say. So
because that makes sense.
Lucky today. Yeah, and I was just gonna finish up with a few studies, because it's hard to kind of show pictures of some of this stuff, but there's studies all over the world. So this first one's from China, but the other ones are from the US and from New Zealand. And what I thought was interesting in this one was that they used 3 different sources of humic acid. There wasn't a single one where they didn't have an increase in corn yield. But the most interesting part, in my opinion, was that actually, when they tested for residual N, the residual N was a lot higher in where the humic acid was, and also it was in the top 30 centimeters instead of it leaching down to 30 to 90 centimeters. So you had less leaching, less volatilization, and the nutrients stayed in the horizon where your crop actually can use them. So I found that kind of interesting. Yeah, if you can go to the next slide.
You got it.
This is on, this is so an actual USDA 4-year study by the USDA. And when we're talking about being in a dry cycle, like I know we have a lot of snow right now, but it doesn't mean that we're going to have timely rains. And we've been in a dry cycle for the last few years. And I know for ourselves, it hasn't always necessarily shown up as yield, but we've also had a lot of increase. Like we had, I think compared to our neighbors, we're probably one of the only ones that didn't have problems with test weight on oats and things like that. And I'm starting to wonder if, well, it's probably partly our rotation, but also partly things like this. They saw 20 to 50% more root length, and also had higher yields, but especially in a drought. And they had basically 4 different years weather-wise, and there wasn't a single year where they didn't see a yield advantage, although they didn't change anything in terms of rate application. And then I was going to go to the last one, which I think for most cattle people is going to be the most interesting. So this study was actually done in New Zealand, and they also tested for bacteria and fungi in the soil after. And what they did is they fertilized a field of ryegrass and white clover, and at the bottom, it kind of just says that they pre-fertilized it with phosphate and lime. But it's been used for 50 years for pasture grazing. And then if you can skip over to the next slide, what I found really interesting, and this is a couple things to watch out for, is so they used about 4 different rates of humic acid, and the white bar on the left is where they did just urea fertilization, and the 10% humic acid did better than higher rates of humic acid, so you can over apply it. Is something that you have to be careful with, because I think it over chelates the nutrients. But what was interesting is that they had over 10% increase over a 4-year period. So there was actually residual effects from the humic acid over time. They had a 10% increase in hay production. And on top of it, if you look at the right side here, you see an increase. So there on the left is the bacterial populations, and on the right you have both dead and active. The top is active and the bottom is total.
Alex, which graph are you on here?
The right side.
Okay.
So on that side, you see that actually the fungal populations are way higher where you have the humic acid. And when we talk about bacteria to fungal ratios, creating soil aggregation, that's huge. So if we're trying to wean ourselves off of using synthetic fertilizer and have a positive effect on soil, I think that's extremely important.
Sorry, I did not change that, Alex. I don't know who's changing it. I'm not the techie.
It's all good. All good. So basically our first step in kind of increasing our fertilizer efficiency is chelating all of our nutrients. And then the second part is trying to replace some of our soil applied nitrogen with our foliars. So let's see, what's the next?
There you go.
Yeah, so basically the keys to achieving the best foliar response is always you getting the right crop staging and assessing the plant's needs. So like sap testing, timing, always do your foliars early in the morning or in the evening. Get the appropriate rate. So don't over apply. Like, don't use the Morod approach. That more nitrogen is always better. A plant can't take up more than 10 pounds of N over the leaf at a time.
So what, Alex, just talk about that, because I started doing 15 pounds, applied as much as I could because I wanted to be in the sprayer less. But why don't you just talk about your foliar applications? I know they change based on your sap test, but just talk about maybe a generic foliar application of things you see as far as deficiencies. Just
So,
generic deficiencies.
I'd say the highest, the cheapest thing you could do other than a nitrogen application is probably phos. So if you went and got a cheap source of ortho phos and just added it with your herbicide, it helps with that herbicide flashing, but pretty much all of us on a sap test are short on phosphate, and it's one of the key nutrients. That and potassium, which helps with filling your leaves, your seed. Yeah, I'd say it'd be super easy for most guys to go and grab like a few totes of orthophosphate and just add a couple liters to all your herbicides. Something that we've seen probably the highest ROI from as a foliar other than melted urea.
What are you doing for melted urea?
So melted urea, we're usually using 10 gallons. So we're making like a 10% solution. We're putting about 750 gallons of water with 1 metric ton of urea, melting it up. And that's exactly 1 pound of N per gallon of water. And if you go to the next slide, basically this is the timings that you want to look for. So when you're going with your melted urea, you could probably mix it already with your herbicide. We've always chosen to go a separate pass, but for cereals, if you're targeting yield, it's actually pretty early. So most of your yield is going to be decided by tillering. So if you want to affect your yield on most of your cereals, you want to hit it then. And canola 3 to 5 leaf stage, but canola has a super wide range. You can hit it all the way to early flowering and still get a really good response. And if there's any crop you're going to try it on, that's by far the biggest no-brainer. There's a response pretty much every time on canola. And corn as well. Corn has a huge potential for foliar response. And it's also like you see a ton of guys top dressing corn and just burning the leaves white. And there's absolutely no need for it. The great part about melted urea is you can flat fan it on and you don't even burn the leaves if you do it at the correct timing of the day.
Well, I know, present company included, I have burnt the ever living hell out of a few corn crops. And I know Doug Whitehead, who is I think likely still on. Doug has burnt a corn crop and did yield trials, and it was, I mean, you tell me a plant loses photosynthesis for 3 days in July, I would say, I mean, that there goes your yield, goodbye. But and Doug, you can comment on this if you want, if I'm getting numbers wrong, but I'm almost positive the melted urea trials he did where he burnt the corn, he still out yielded where there was nothing applied. So yeah, there is something to it. That's for damn sure.
No, there's no doubt. Yeah, I guess I'll explain it a little bit better in a second. So here's like, just when we're doing, like, if we're talking generic foliars, if you're not going to do a sap test, basically the thing I would concentrate on is your phosphate to start with, your herbicides, just to keep that energy transfer going in the plant and that photosynthesis. And that you want to spray if you want to cut your nitrogen up front and still have, like, if you have a really good year coming and you want to keep some of that top end potential, melted urea is definitely a good idea. And yeah, just keep in mind those stages with different crops to get that response. Otherwise, if you're going later, you're probably just going after protein on some of those cereals. The next slide. Let's see what that is. So I guess melted urea. I think this is one of my last slides because it's probably way over time here, but
So far over time, but it's okay. Now we're crying over spilled milk.
yeah. So basically, this is, if other than fulvic acid, this is probably one of the biggest no-brainers in my opinion, is trying to cut back your N up front so that you're not shocking your soil as much and bypassing that inefficiency of the soil and just going on and spraying a bit of nitrogen up top. So the interesting part about melted urea versus UAN is the fact that it comes in the amine form. So basically when the crop is converting the nitrates, it's basically saving 30% of the energy that the plant needs to get to an amino acid, because it goes from nitrate to ammonium and then to amino acids, which are proteins in the plant. So you're basically skipping a huge part of that nitrogen cycle, and
which takes energy,
that's where
right?
the gain in efficiency is coming from. Pardon me?
Like, which takes energy, which is why we saw, like, for the cattle farmers that are on here, that's why we saw high nitrates where this year in plants, where the plant uptook nitrate nitrogen and didn't have the energy to break it down any further.
Yeah, 100%. And that's lowering your bricks too. So if your plant's trying to fend off diseases or insects later, it's going to have a harder time doing that if its plant sugars are diluted by a ton of nitrates. So yeah, that's basically overall is our nutrient efficiency plan. It's just basically targeting foliars at the right times and chelating everything. So we're chelating the melted urea with humic acid because it's basically locking up, buffering those salts. We're also just chelating all of our nitrogen up front, all of our phosphate up front. And I think that's really helped us over the last few years, just be able to reduce by at least 30% our upfront for fertility.
So you gotta be quick here, but talk about your corn crop with you're just using foliar feeding and hog manure.
Yeah, so I know Del talked a little bit about hog manure before. So this was pea barley the previous year, and then we went and planted corn into this with, well, the Hutterites actually offered, because they were building a new barn, they couldn't put any manure on their own barn, so their own field. So we decided to put some on here, and then they always add usually 60 to 80 pounds of anhydrous on top of this, because they say it mineralizes unevenly and most of it only becomes available in the second year. So we tested that and we went and sprayed melted urea twice at V4 and at V10, so just before tasseling. And this crop got a ton of hail damage to the point where some of the top leaves and the plant were bent over and almost touching the bottom leaves. And then we got a killing frost at quarter milk stage, and it still made 140 bushels. And this is non-GMO corn that usually has less yield potential than some of those GMO varieties. And this was underseeded with alfalfa as well. So we were capturing a ton of sunlight all the way until probably middle of October, because there was a solid mat of alfalfa where we got a good catch underneath that, kind of mimicking what you're doing with the hairy vetch. From a grazing perspective, if we had animals, this would be unbelievable, the return on investment on this field. But yeah, it's just to show the power of targeting your foliars at the right time.
Oh, I guess that means you're done, Alex.
I'm done.
You're not done yet. I forgot I had a summary here. This will be very, very quick. So we can get to we got a shit ton of questions we got to get to here. And I don't know what time it is, but I can tell you guys all did a great job, and I'm glad it was as long as it was. I just wanted to touch on, I had a light bulb moment myself, and I want to start the question period with a question similar to this, but I got a tiny little farm. We got 250 cows and 1,500 arable acres. Based on Manitoba cost of production, I figured out my average cost based on conventional production was going to be about wheat, which they had pegged at $571 per acre on 1,500 acres. That is $855,000 in inputs. My teeny weeny farm would produce in a year. And that's just not risk I'm willing to take. I know you can do a budget and based on regular yields. I know maybe the wheat goes 50 or 60, something like that. And look, you can make an absolute killing. But so often it happens the other way, like 2021. And I'm not willing to take that kind of risk that it would take to produce that kind of a crop. So I think, I mean, another important thing is look, based on what these three guys talked about tonight, look how much more efficiently, if we don't chase, you know, the 200 bushel oats or 70 bushel canola or, you know, maybe 100 bushel wheat, how much more efficiently we can use these extremely expensive and honestly expensive. Price may not be the limiting factor. It'd be like, can we source these fertilizers come spring? I know there's people from Saskatchewan and Alberta on tonight that are concerned about this. So yeah, I mean, something we didn't talk about tonight is how much risk is a farm willing to take on based on the return. I know it looks good on paper, but as we know, Mother Nature bats last, and she decides what type of yields we're going to have. And it's not how much nitrogen we put down or how much phosphorus or how many times we till. It's carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, sunlight, and water. And that dictates how efficiently we use, these synthetic fertilizers. So I won't talk anymore, guys. Take your, if you guys are still awake, Chris, it's been a while since you've been on. If you guys want to take your screens up, we got a whole bunch of questions here. I'm just pulling them up. You know what? Alex and Del, if you're there, okay, just to give me a chance to kind of filter some of these questions, I'm going to start with my first question, which is this. If you guys knew nothing about soil health and the efficiencies of fertilizer, and I gave you 110 pounds of nitrogen and 50 pounds phosphorus, and you can have all the sulfur you want and all the potassium you want, and you got to put it up front, how much better would your yields be if I gave you all the fertilizer you wanted, cost-free, versus what you're going to use this year, which is thoughtful and split applications and foliar feeding? And I know, Del, in your case, just 30 years or 40 years of the right practices. But if I could give you unlimited fertilizers, how much better do you think your yield would be? Chris, I'm sorry to start with you. You're probably napping this whole time. But we'll go Chris.
I got pages
Del,
of notes here.
Chris, Del, Alex, we'll go in that order. So Trav and I can kind of manage some of the questions that are coming in. But if I gave you unlimited fertilizer for free, how much better would your yield be than what you're doing this year?
Well, see, because we're just starting, this is being our first year. Our goal is to still produce the same amount of grain, but and increase margin, right? Like, we're not actually getting rid of fertilizer. So I would say none, like zero. Our goal is still to produce that same amount. We cut off that 30% Alex talks about by switching and then keeping melted urea in our back pocket. Like, we're not necessarily going to use it. It depends on if it's a dry year, there's no point, right? That's not going to be a limiting factor. But you can give me as much as you want. Our goal is that we're going to maintain that yield. So I'd say zero is our thought. I don't have numbers to prove that because we haven't done it yet. So, Del?
Yeah, I think we're pretty competitive on the yields, Joe. And just talking with other people at coffee and having beers and whatnot. 5-10%. maybe we're giving up, or maybe 0. I don't know, but I think we're in the ballpark, right there with everybody.
Alex, I don't know if you can hear me. You got to unmute yourself and put your screen on. So Alex, if I give you unlimited fertilizer and price was not an option, how much better are your yields under that system versus what you're doing now?
I guess it depends a little bit on water. If you had an unbelievable growing season and everything went perfectly, I'd agree with Dell, maybe 10-15%. But in years where we have tough weather situation, I'd say we probably gain that. So yeah, it's, I guess. And then the other thing is what does that do long term if you over apply things like that? So yeah, I don't know, I'd say we're still aiming for the same overall.
Okay, and I'll answer the question as well. We are consciously giving up yield because 96% of a plant is sunlight and moisture. And we have livestock. So in our system, this is how this works, is we give up sunlight and moisture to establish another crop, to extend the grazing season, so we can have a profitable cow herd, but the added benefits of plant diversity. So I guess if you gave me a monocrop system and said, I got to grow wheat canola, I think right off the top, you could cut 30% of your fertilizer usage and not give up 1 bushel of yield. If you gave me some humic acid and some split timing on fertilizer, some foliar fertilizer, I'll take it one step further. I think you're not giving up any yield, and you can probably save yourself some insecticide and some fungicide as well. So anyway, guys, we're going to keep moving on because we got a ton of questions, and I know all 3 of you have experience in this. I actually don't, but what weed control options in the PO'd intercrop? Dell, I know we touched on it, but well, I guess Chris, we did as well. And Alex, I know you have some experience on it as well. So I know Chris, Dell, you talked about nothing, and we talked about the benefits of not doing anything as far as herbicide for photosynthesis and keeping a plant growing. But let's say you had to spray or you wanted a herbicide option. What are your guys' options in a PO'd intercrop? Maybe we'll go opposite. Alex, we'll start with you, then Dell, Chris.
So most of my peyotes that I've grown have all been organic. So I just use nothing, interrow cultivator, but I think, what's the, I can't remember what the herbicide anymore that Chris Ropers is using.
In crop Bassagran.
Yeah, that's right.
It's the only option I could find.
Dell, you back that up?
Yeah, I think if it's forage peas too, I think that'd be a very competitive crop, but I don't know what you'd use.
I mean, and again, I'm biased to my system. We're gonna, not that I thought you were crazy, Dell, when last fall we were touring your place and you were saying no synthetics. Well, now the market has dictated I'm not using any synthetics. So I wish I had your system, but anyway, in my system we have cows, and also the price of feed is so insane. Where, I mean, something like an oat pea, and you don't hit it with herbicide. Well, the weedy patches you cut for feed, and in this marketplace, you know, that's worth 8 to 10 cents a pound, which is some pretty incredible return when you consider what you put in for inputs. So guys, here's a good question. Could you avoid early residue problems with proper C to N ratio? Dell, maybe we'll start with you just to be fair, to lead it off, and then we'll go Alex and Chris. So the question again is, could you avoid early residue problems with proper C to N? You know what? Maybe I'll just give, it's going to depend on your seeding tool. I'll say that, but go ahead, see what you come up with an answer. Can you avoid residue issues? And I guess it depends what do you define as a residue issue, but go ahead, Dell, try and take a stab at it.
Well, I think it's very important if you have a good seed-end ratio. In the spring, if you have a lot of carbon out there in cold, wet soil, things like nitrogen might be tied up short term. So maybe a crop choice is along with the seeding tool, but a crop choice is a good idea. You have a whole bunch of carbon. Well, planting corn into a whole bunch of carbon probably isn't a good idea. Maybe you go with a pea or some sort of a legume, I would think would help, but it would definitely have a huge impact. I think that he's right. Proper seed-end ratio. You look at our fall seeded cover crops and then grazed with cattle, not too much issues. It establishes super early. So I think he's onto something.
Alex?
Yeah. I guess the only thing I could say is we did, for example, in fall rye last year, we seeded Austrian winter peas and had fall rye regrowth and just volunteers come up. And where we put that in on the fall rye stubble in the spring, the difference, like I have a video of it, how it basically it almost turns into dust in your hands, that rye straw. So if you have any issues with hair pinning or things like that, yeah, I think C to N is going to make a big difference if that's a problem.
Chris, take a stab.
Yeah, I don't have much experience myself. It was a concern of ours, though, with just switching zero till. We don't have a lot of biology in our soil. We know that because we've been a heavy fertilizer user, all chemicals really. But one thing talking with guys is exactly what Dell says. If you got a cereal crop, don't follow it up with another high carbon crop. You got a rotation, to balance that seed end would be important, because I don't know if necessarily 1 year you'll have an issue, but multiple years in a row you'd build an issue, right? Then you're for sure going to get an issue and have a problem getting proper soil contact. So that's just kind of what I've heard.
And I think from my experience, it really comes down to the seeding tool. The thing about seed N is we want to balance, right? If I want my residue to go away really quickly, well, I've got too high of nitrogen, not enough carbon, and I'm going to see the same issues. So many people on this webinar are familiar with our 60-inch corn trial. Well, let me tell you a story about that. The 60-inch corn, where we had literally 9 tons of vetch an acre and a corn crop, it came up, the residue went away, and it came up thistle. Just, you could see the line in the field where it went from 60-inch to 30-inch. And we had an imbalance. We had a nitrogen imbalance, which caused a weed situation. So, always we're trying to strive for these minerals that we have to pay money for, AKA nitrogen. And we want, to see these amazing soil tests with 100 pounds of nitrogen, but that ain't how Mother Nature works. She works in a balance, and having residue is not a bad thing. It's a much better thing than the alternative, which is nothing. So it really comes down to, I think a seeding tool is so very important. Guys, there are some very good questions here, so I'm just going to hammer them off one after another. Excellent question. Doug Whitehead has asked about crop insurance. And if I guess I could go first, maybe I'll go last, but Alex, you're doing organic and conventional. Maybe talk about your crop insurance strategies, what you do with these intercrops, and we'll go Alex, Chris, Dell.
I don't have any crop insurance on the organics, so because it's not worth taking. And then on the conventional side, yeah, that's a good question. I think it doesn't even make sense to take the crop insurance to a large extent.
So the question was, which I'm sure you guys have experiences, and I know how I feel about this, I can talk about it, is the novel crop insurance. Is it worth it?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
So that's definitely a risk.
And Dell, I know you're a bit of the Wild West.
Well, I think it depends on your coverage and your premium, but you can use the they boot you out when it's when you do intercrop, but you can use that as your advantage. Like if your corn coverage is just garbage, say it's corn and beans, and then you're free and clear. But canola and wheat for us are pretty good, but the specialty crops are tough. So we are still involved in crop insurance, but we can manipulate it somewhat with.
So I will say, not that it's a loophole. I do it totally legally, and I think my crop insurance provider is on tonight. So hey, Dan, how's it going? I'm advertising this. But for us, like, we don't necessarily. Our goal for intercropping isn't necessarily to separate two crops. Although yes, we do that. But I will never use novel crop insurance again. I'll throw in some hail, and that's cool. But we've literally never got a payment from novel crop insurance. But for us, where we try and utilize cattle on every acre, you can put establishing a forage, which essentially that's not mischievous. That is exactly what we are trying to do. Now, I think what crop insurance wants that to do is to allow you to establish a perennial forage, which we don't do. We establish a forage underneath the cash crop in which we can graze animals on. And the benefit of that is we don't lose any coverage at all. And they don't come out and say, well, all this green lush biomass at the end of the year is a weed, instead of this is actually the crop we planned on having. So I used to hesitate telling people that because I thought I had something. And as soon as I told too many people, they were going to shut that loophole down. But have at it, Hoss. It's a really good idea.
I was just going to touch real quick. I've talked lots with our crop insurance guy, and they are actually working on stuff for intercropping because it's becoming more popular. Supposed to be actually some stuff coming out yet that they're supposed to be announcing, but I haven't heard anything. One thing he said though is the rates suck. They farm as well. He said I wouldn't even insure it for those because they have zero data to go off of. So for us insuring it, we need to continue to report yields of that intercrop, because that's how they get a database. It's the same as forage. Forage coverage sucks with crop insurance because no one ever reports their good yields. They only try and get a claim when it's no good, right? So he said if we report our yields, they can try and build that data.
Yeah, and I agree with that as well. You should try and record your data, even if it's not insured, because it starts to build a database of which we can start to insure these things. Okay, guys, moving right along. Doug asked another good question. Doug, you're going to get a jacket yet. You're crying out loud. These good questions. Anyone testing their water for hardness, if high in calcium, magnesium, etc., using AMS to buffer a cheap way with fulvic, citric to help glyphosate efficiency? So, Alex, maybe we'll start with you. I think you've probably got the most experience with this. What are you doing to buffer your water?
Yeah, so we definitely have super high or super hard water, extremely high in calcium and carbonates. So we're doing pretty much exactly what Doug mentioned there. So using citric acid and fulvic to kind of buffer that and reduce the pH. It's extremely cheap, costs like 70 cents an acre to do that. So basically it's what we're doing.
Del, what are you guys doing? Test your water?
Yeah, we're using dugout water, and I haven't been testing it, but we use a lot of AMS with glyphosate, and seems to really work well.
Maybe what does somebody want to touch on what AMS is and why it's important?
It's granular, like put it through the mixing zone, ammonia sulfate, right?
Yeah, and the goal is, I think, ideal pH of glyphosate, like water is what, 7 or 7.1, something like that. The
Right.
ideal pH of glyphosate to work most efficiency is 2.9. Why they don't tell you that, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist. I guess I'll say I don't know. But why would
You get
they
to sell
tell us?
more.
Yeah, why wouldn't they tell us that?
I sold it for 6 years and I didn't know that. So
Exactly. Like I mean, I've sprayed literally thousands of liters of glyphosate. Nobody told me the pH is supposed to be 2.9 and not 7. So anyway, for whoever's left on the webinar, the easiest damn thing you'll do is a little bit of fulvic acid and get your ideal pH, and you've never seen glyphosate work that good.
we did it this year for the first time, and like you said, we were spraying half of our rate of glyphosate that we'd sprayed before. It worked awesome.
And I mean, we're getting better, as good as results as we've ever been in this herbicide resistant world that we live in, with half the amount of glyphosate, which they tell me is going to expedite our resistant issues. It's not.
I started asking reps on other chemicals, what's the proper pH? And any other chemicals haven't got a response.
Oh, good. Chris, you broke up there, but you're back.
Sorry.
Hey guys, we got a couple more. We got a couple really good questions here I wanted to touch on. Alex, I know you do tissue and sap testing, so we'll start with you, but I'd love to get your other guys' opinion. I've got one as well. Have any of you tissue tested weed plants along with your crop tissues to find out nutrient issues in your field? That is a good question. Alex, have you ever done that?
Yeah, we've been doing it for 3 years now. And I guess the biggest deficiencies have pretty much always been phosphate, calcium, and then sometimes boron or zinc.
So Alex, just touch on, why are you testing the weed versus your crop, and like, what do you hope to learn from that?
Okay, no, we haven't been testing any of our weeds. Yeah, I have never done that. So I know
I think I get the theory, right? Like the theory is like a weed is there to heal the soil. So
for sure.
I guess I don't fully understand, like, it would, like, the weed be not deficient or high in a certain mineral and your crop would be deficient?
I don't know. I've read a few different books where they use, for example, let's say pigweed. It represents that you're too high in nitrates and potassium, or dandelions is usually a calcium deficiency or things like that. But I've never tested it, to be honest.
You guys got anything to add? I don't have a whole lot other than what I just said.
No.
I think there's a good book that's like Why Weeds Grow, and they usually are there for a reason.
Totally.
Trying to tell us something, but haven't ever tissue test weeds, and but they're probably trying to tell us something.
Okay, guys, I got two more questions that I think everyone has experience with. Can you plant corn without fertilizer if you grow a full season blend? Actually, all four of us have something that we can contribute, because I think we've all done some variation. Del, you're going to do a shit ton of it this year. Why don't you talk about what you're going to expect, and then we can kind of go around the circle here.
Yeah, we're going to plant with some soybeans, some alfalfa, and some vetch with our corn to stimulate the soil biologically and fix nitrogen. So, this question of can you plant without nitrogen? Well, there's other ways around that you can give yourself an opportunity to, fix nitrogen. And the year after full season cover, I think the soil's ready to roll too. So I think you can do it. Yes.
Chris, you did that last year.
Well, we didn't do no fertilizer because we cut and didn't graze the full season. If we grazed it, we were going to try, but because we fed it, we didn't. Yeah, they showed no difference, but that cornfield yielded 40 this year. It had a few issues, and with major drought, that was our worst field, but we just had a few other issues on that field that weren't related to the drought as well. So there was no difference in the fertilizer rate, but it was just a bad overall crop. So not a fair trial this year.
Alex, I think your your corn was maybe a little dry this year.
Yeah, it didn't work out so well. Yeah, yeah. But I've never done zero fertilizer except for on the organic, and I tried your experiment where to basically see the cover crop in between and do 60-inch corn on the organic and then mow between the rows. And we decided for some reason to do it on 36 acres instead of like 2 acres. Because we saw this super cool mower on YouTube that they made like an inter-row mower, and apparently it's better at taking down thistles than inter-row cultivating. And yeah, I did it with my riding mower, and after about 10 acres and 3 days later, I gave up. I couldn't hear anything anymore for about a week.
And just for par for the course, my corn intercrops were absolute dog shit this year. Terrible. We did a whole bunch of experiments, and we did learn some stuff. We were trying low population corn with a drill. So instead of having our sunlight corridors down a 30-inch row, we tried to lower the plant population of the corn low enough so just sunlight could access around the corn plant and the vetch could grow. Basically, the grasshoppers virtually wiped out any vetch that was there. The very interesting part was, and I think from a cattle feed perspective was, and we're going to have to trial this again this year because plant populations in the drought are going to be completely different based on if there's moisture or not. But at like between 12 and 16,000 plants an acre through an air seeder, we were seeing 2 cobs per stalk instead of just 1. So if we're doubling the amount of energy through corn seeds versus energy through a high lignin corn stalk, that has some crazy potential because virtually a ruminant animal is getting no value from a corn stalk because the process to break down the lignin, for the biology to break down the lignin and access the digestible carbon that's buried beneath the lignin is extensive. So if we can double the amount of digestible energy through the grain, the corn grain, instead of the stalk, I think that has some huge potential. But when you couple that with lowering the plant population so we get 2 cobs, it also means we can access sunlight with an intercrop. And then we can start talking about reducing inputs on that crop. We can talk about balancing C to N, grazing livestock, and reducing inputs the following year. So I think there is no end of potential as far as corn intercrops and the creativeness we can get by capturing sunlight high and having low C to N, low sunlight legumes down below. I think we've barely scratched the surface of the potential of what can happen there. Okay, guys, I'm going to do one more question. Okay, we got another corn question here. And then like for real, I have to pee so bad. I don't know how many hours we've been on this, but I'm going to call it due to my bladder. Have any of you grown corn just putting on cow manure on heavy fields? So I know similar type of question. I don't know, Del, you might be a good one to ask, but I know Alex, you've some access to some hog manure as well. Del, why don't you start?
Yeah, I'm not sure we've experienced that. Like he's spreading the manure heavily. I don't know on that. One thing I'll say that the conventional corn, you're talking about the stalks a lot, Joe. The conventional corn, the cattle seem to do better on the conventional corn than the Roundup Ready for whatever reason. The stalks break down easier or whatnot. But what was the question again?
Just manure.
Yeah,
So
but
where
yeah.
you spread manure.
And it's not going to use any other fertilizer.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, if it's not too thick, sometimes it can get too thick too, which can be detrimental, but a light application, I think it'll be okay. Yeah.
Alex, do you have any experience with corn and manure?
Well, I think pig manure behaves really different to cow manure. So I don't have any experience with cow manure, to be honest. So
My biggest experience with cow manure is tripping on it in February, checking cows. And I hate it all.
Doesn't taste good, does it?
Okay, I haven't given away a jacket, but I'll tell you what, somebody will just figure out there's so many good questions. We'll just I think we have everyone's email in here. But anyway, guys, it has been an excellent webinar, a ton of great conversation and good chat. Thanks to everyone that was on. Super questions again. We'll email someone and give somebody a jacket. Maybe we should give the panelists a jacket. What do you guys think? No.
Pretty sick jacket.
I'm not wearing it. Dell, you'd like one of these.
Yeah,
play baseball
right.
for a real team.
Oh yeah.
All right. Anyway, have a good night, guys. Thanks everyone for coming on. We'll see you in 2 weeks. I can't tell you what we're talking about. But anyway, have a good night, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks.
night.
We'll see you.